All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy to experience or get to share this like crisp autumn morning with you all. So for those who are tuning in, I'm Jessica. I'm the developer advocate at dYdX Labs, and really excited to be with you all here today on our 12th episode now of Powered by dYdX. So it's that happy dozen. So yeah, happy Thanksgiving to those who are in the States. Hope everyone's getting to have some time off and just have a little refreshing time. So yeah, for those who are maybe newer to Powered by dYdX, this is a developer-focused live stream where we get to explore features of the dYdX ecosystem and interview developers who are building innovative projects on the dYdX tech stack. So whether you're building novel financial tools or integrating swaps into your application, or simply looking to better understand the dYdX protocol, the API, or the governance structure, the show has something for you. And today, we'll be really excited to speak with Brendan, who is the chief architect over at dYdX. dYdX is a non-custodial decentralized exchange that, for those of you who've been around, have really shook the crypto world earlier this year when they announced that they're going to be developing as a standalone Cosmos blockchain. So really excited to dive into what that means, what has gone on since that announcement, and then we'll be talking with him about how they use dYdX as well, and just how the whole process is going. And since this is a live stream, really welcome you to bring your questions. This is your time to ask Brendan questions, just to have your chance to pick his brain, about all things dYdX. So before we dive into that interview, though, I want to jump into a set of quick announcements. So I'm going to pull the announcement screen up here. Just one quick announcement for today. I've been doing the past couple of episodes about SFing Week that happened, I think, 3 weeks ago now. So just yesterday, we released this recap of everything that went on. So if you could just take a look on our dYdX project Twitter, it's probably like the top 2-3 posts right now. So you check that out. There's a written recap here. One thing I do want to call out is that we have the dYdX Expo videos up now. So if you go into the blog post, you can see videos of all the talks that went on during that conference. So a lot of interesting conversations there. So definitely check that out. Also a recap of the winners of ETHSF who built on dYdX. So you can take a look into their projects. You can click in to see their pitch, learn a little bit about them. If you want to learn more about them, connect with them, this is the place to do it. So that is all I have for announcements today. So I'm going to take that back screen. And then, so with that, let's welcome Brendan on screen and get the conversation going. So, hey, Brendan.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. How's it going for you?
Doing well. Thanks.
Nice.
Good to be here.
Yeah, well, happy to have you on. How about starting off with, just a quick introduction of yourself. Also, maybe how you got into where you are today.
Sure, yeah. So I'm an engineer at dYdX. I guess my official title is chief architect, but basically it's just doing whatever is most important engineering-wise for the company at the time. I've been with dYdX. It'll be 5 years. In 2 months, it'll be 5 years. So I was the first. Antonio, the founder, who I know from college, we were roommates. So that kind of helped influence me to join on when it was just the two of us. And we started as kind of like a smart contract company or as a protocol company, pretty influenced by 0x actually. So when I moved out to San Francisco to join dYdX, there weren't that many DeFi companies at the time. I remember it was basically just the ones we knew about were like 0x and Maker. So it was like sort of the beginnings of the DeFi ecosystem on Ethereum. And since then, we've basically decided to pivot from being just a protocol company to build out everything full stack. We eventually thought, okay, we should build kind of like an MVP on our initial margin trading and lending protocol to show people how they could use it. And then ultimately decided like no one was building on our tech stack. We just had to do it ourselves. And that we ended up building a pretty good product. So I think since sort of about a year in, we've just been doing everything full stack from the protocol stuff to backend stuff and front end to help people like understand and use the actual protocols and stuff that we were building, but ultimately like build stuff in a kind of open and composable and auditable way. So happy to expand on any more of that in particular, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe just a quick tangent, but you mentioned you started as a smart contract company. Like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I guess we thought that we would just be writing sort of Solidity smart contracts for a while and hope other people that would build products on top and then like somehow capture value at the protocol layer from people like building on top and basically providing more like open infrastructure to people building on top. And I think that's kind of like the route that 0x had been taking at the time, and I think continues to take in a lot of ways. But ultimately kind of like decided to pivot from that.
I see. So like cover, yeah, as opposed to like more of a thin layer, like you're covering like more of the stack.
Exactly.
Nice. How about talking about how you kind of touched on how dYdX started, but also like the evolution to where it is today. Maybe just like a high overview since we'll be diving into other parts later.
Yeah, sure. So I guess we've released a product like every year or every year and a half or something like that on average. We started with margin trading protocol, as I mentioned, and then we built kind of a product on top of that, which we called Expo. And we had kind of like loans, and then we had like margin tokens that you could buy, like 2x levered Ethereum, 3x levered Ethereum, like short Ethereum and stuff like that. And I was just using like Ethereum and DAI, and then basically you could like trade in and out of those positions using on-chain liquidity. So 0x. Maker actually had an on-chain order book DEX, which had like really good liquidity for DAI to ETH at the time. Uniswap was not a thing yet. So basically we're using like mostly 0x and Maker's exchange, which is called Oasis at the time. And yeah, it eventually got too costly gas-wise because it would just require an entire transaction to post liquidity or cancel liquidity on this like order book. But it had really good liquidity for DAI at the time. And then eventually we took that idea and added it to like a lending pool. So think about like Aave or Compound, those kinds of things were becoming big at the time. So we're like, okay, we could continue to do margin trading, but sort of add it to a lending pool. So you could like earn interest or pay interest on your positions while they're open. You could just lend if you just wanted to lend, or you can continue to do margin trading. And then we had the liquidity for the margin trading was still coming from on-chain exchanges, primarily 0x. And then we decided that we wanted to basically create our own matching engine. This would like help guarantee that people's transactions would actually go through. At the time, we were having some trouble with like, okay, you require the users to pay the transaction fee. They have to like set their gas correctly, which like MetaMask wasn't like necessarily helping with. So we basically just decided we want users to be able to click and trade, and then we would settle the trade on the back end by sending our own transaction. And that worked like pretty well for a while, except then DeFi summer came, and then transaction fees were like crazy. Like there were times when a transaction was like hundreds of dollars, and that just wasn't sustainable. Like we were covering the gas fees. We had zero gas fees and zero trading fees for a long time, but yeah, the issue came when we started having to spend like tens or hundreds of dollars per trade for our users, and that wasn't sustainable. So we started basically like in the short term, passing those costs on to the users, which wasn't a great user experience. So we were really focused on scalability and adding scalability there. Yeah, I guess two things happened. We started offering perpetuals on layer one because we wanted people to be able to trade assets that weren't necessarily native to Ethereum, like Bitcoin. We wanted people to be able to trade Bitcoin. And we thought perpetuals were the best way to do that. Since at the time, like wrapped Bitcoin was getting like pretty big, but we weren't really sure about its future and like the liquidity and how many people were going to be like wrapping Bitcoin and putting it on Ethereum. And I think in hindsight, like we made the right decision. Like wrap Bitcoin on Ethereum never got super big in DeFi. But we basically started offering perps on layer one, and then we were also focused on not paying these exorbitant gas fees. So we knew we needed to like scale somehow. So that's when we decided on working with Starkware to use their layer two or develop like a custom layer two solution with them, which allowed us to batch like 10,000 trades basically into a single transaction. So that's going to give you like a lot of gas savings, obviously. So we continue to basically pay those gas fees for the users by batching all the transactions in layer two blocks and posting them to the blockchain. And then users just have to focus on normal trading fees like they would have to do at any other exchange without having to worry about gas fees, except for the layer one transactions like depositing and stuff like that. So that kind of, I guess, puts us at our current product today, which is USDC margined perpetuals exchange on a custom Starkware layer two. And I think now we're focused on how can we keep that level of scale, but also decentralize what we're doing even more. And we're kind of looking around at a lot of different options, whether that's using faster layer ones like Solana or creating our own blockchain, either kind of like on Polkadot or Cosmos or something like that. So ultimately, we decided on building our own blockchain, which I think is a bit more work since there's not going to be necessarily a ton of tooling built out for custom blockchain, but also gives us a lot of agency and ability to change things and optimize things over time, and a lot more control than sort of if we were to build on something like Solana, where the most of the work into working on blockchains like that are not necessarily like net beneficial to what we're doing, or or we have to like compete with like block space with a bunch of other projects if we're on that chain. So sort of like a lot of the similar problems that we ran into using Ethereum in the past, but just like, okay, maybe marginally the gas fees and stuff like that will be like smaller, but yeah, I guess not even sure whether the gas fees will remain small if the chain actually gets adoption and stuff like that. So we're now in the midst of building out that custom Cosmos chain for our exchange.
No, well, thanks for going through that evolution. I think that was helpful, just kind of see like as each piece that you added on each piece, and then it feels like you find your footing now, and like you want to figure out how to do it well, do it fast, do it fully decentralized. So that's cool to see that evolution. Maybe you can dive into, you were mentioning now that you're looking to build out your own blockchain, and you mentioned looking at other projects. You kind of highlighted some reasons for why Cosmos, but yeah, why Cosmos? And then are you still using the Tendermint proof of stake protocol? And if yeah, could you give a high level of the two projects for maybe those who are slightly newer to these?
Yeah, so the naming isn't great too, because there's like Cosmos SDK, then there's like the Cosmos Hub blockchain, and then there's like, well, what is a Cosmos chain in general, sort of? And I think the term is like sort of overloaded. Yeah, and then there's like Tendermint, which is like a piece of that. So it's I think more confusing than it's necessary. So basically, I guess how I would explain it is Cosmos SDK is an SDK written in Go to build custom blockchains. And it has a lot of like default logic that you can add to your chain if you want. So there's kind of like a default staking module that you can just like pull in from the SDK and use that. And that's kind of like what a lot of people choose to use because they don't want to write and audit their own staking software, sort of. Tendermint is like the consensus algorithm that Cosmos SDK uses. And that's basically, it's not inherently proof of stake, but it's basically like you have a set of validators with different weights, and they take turns like in a weighted round robin algorithm, basically proposing blocks, and then all the other validators will validate those blocks. So that's just like the consensus algorithm itself is Tendermint, and Cosmos SDK uses that, and then you can add like custom logic on top, whether that's like you could run the EVM or you could run like custom logic, or you can do anything sort of like on the application side. And then sort of like the Tendermint consensus side, and then the application logic sort of talk to each other over this protocol that's known as ABCI, which is the application blockchain interface. So there's kind of like two pieces, and then those two pieces together form the blockchain, like the consensus and the application layer. And Cosmos Hub is basically like, I guess, the flagship blockchain that was created using Cosmos SDK. So a lot of like the default modules were created for Cosmos Hub, but it's basically its own blockchain, and there's nothing inherently necessarily, I guess, tying Cosmos Hub to other blockchains or other Cosmos chains together. You kind of have to have both chains opt in to doing some sort of inter-blockchain communication, or IBC. So that's kind of like the common way that Cosmos chains will talk to each other if they want to, but they can also remain fully sovereign if they want to. So I think Cosmos chain in general just means usually a blockchain that was built using the Cosmos SDK, and that is at least ready or somewhat ready to use IBC to, say, transfer tokens between two other Cosmos blockchains. Yeah, let me know if I missed any part of that question. But
no, that was helpful to essentially break down the different components, and yeah, because I feel like high level, I conceptually understand like the idea of like a modularizing blockchains. Is it like you take the like the application layer, the consensus layer, and then the data layer, and so that's essentially what you're separating. So you have Tendermint as a consensus layer, and then is it Cosmos SDK that's helping you build the blockchain layer, and then I think you're saying like ABCI is the one that's connecting those two, and then like potentially these separate blockchains that are built on Cosmos SDKs might talk to each other if they decide to both opt into that, but they could also just be separate.
I think from like a normal person's perspective, you can consider them all sort of like jumbled into one blockchain. Okay. I guess the way I was kind of presenting it is almost more from like a software engineering perspective, where you're like, okay, we have a separation of concerns. You like split out things into, it's like do one thing and do one thing well, where you have like the consensus layer is distinctly different from like the application layer. Yeah, that's more of like a software engineering view. I think for the purposes of kind of like understanding, if you're not writing the software, like what is it, then you can just consider it to be all one blockchain with its own custom logic. Yeah.
I see. I just had a random thought. Is it called Cosmos because it's the idea that you can have all these kind of planets of blockchains that are in this?
Yeah, that's how I think about it. I don't know. I didn't come up with the name, but I assume it's something like that. Yeah.
I see.
And like constellations, like stars, kind of like
yeah.
And stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. That helps bring it all together. Let's see. I think there are a couple directions I wanted to go with that, but maybe first want to talk about the order book. So essentially the idea of like, why did you guys go with Cosmos? I know we've probably a lot of people watching have heard of like the discussion of going fully decentralized, but wanted to hear from you, like, what does that mean? Yeah, what does it mean to go fully decentralized?
Yeah, so I guess it's basically that we are not running any of our own software, basically, or not required to. Maybe we will for the purposes of like just like general data collection or helping people understand like a blockchain explorer type of thing, like what's going on with the chain and stuff like that. But basically, I think we had a couple of starting points. So that's one of the starting points. The other starting point is that we wanted to allow for perpetuals trading, and we thought a lot about like, could we do this with like AMMs or something like that, which is maybe like more blockchain native or blockchain friendly, or requires perhaps like a lower amount of like throughput. But we still think order books provide the best like liquidity and like end user experience ultimately when people are trying to like trade a lot into depth. And one thing that we notice from our current system is that like people place orders a lot more than the orders are filled, because market makers are constantly trying to like offer the best bid and ask, kind of like fighting over offering like the best spreads, and then when the price changes, they want to move their orders quickly. So we have, something like a few hundred to a few thousand orders coming in per second, but the number of trades per second is like single to double, maybe triple digits a second if the market is really moving, but basically like an order or two magnitude less than the number of orders being placed. So I guess one thing we've learned in our current system is like, what do we actually do on the layer 2 is we only settle the orders that actually match. This allows us to like not put everything on chain and like makes things a lot more efficient from a perspective of the amount of data that you actually have to have in consensus. So one thing that we wanted to do is keep the orders off chain, but have the settlement be on chain ultimately. And that was one thing that we decided we could do with our own blockchain. You basically just have the orders sort of like being gossiped around in the mempool between different validators. And then only when the two orders cross, you can like verify that through a smart contract. Basically, you can verify, okay, the orders cross, they're both still valid, they haven't expired, and both users have these amount of funds and they can actually match. For building on like a blockchain that we don't have as much control of, something like a Solana or something like that, then you actually have to have all the orders be on chain. And if you're going to place an order or like remove an order, that basically has to be all on chain, because validators aren't going to run custom software for you that you can like kind of like gossip around these special transactions that aren't transactions but might be like settled on chain eventually. So I guess sort of keeping the order book off chain was one of the big reasons that we decided to use Cosmos, or at least write our own chain. And then you can compare using Cosmos SDK to I think like a bunch of people are coming up with software to write your own blockchain now, whether that's I think Polygon has some software now, Polkadot has some software, but we just felt it was like the most mature and the most battle tested, and there have been other chains that were in production using it already. So that was kind of ultimately why we decided to go with Cosmos SDK over those other solutions.
Yeah, the decision between going and working on like an off-chain decentralized order book, versus say like optimizing for an AMM model. Because I know there's different projects in the space that are going that route. I don't know, do you have any kind of sentiments about that? Maybe stuff that came up during that discussion with the team?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess one thing that keeps coming up is sort of like the flexibility of developing your own blockchain. Like, I think we have like high confidence that CLOBs are going to be, or order books are going to be better than AMMs in the short term. I do think AMMs do have a lot of like interesting and exciting properties about them. So we're not like totally convinced that CLOBs are going to be better than AMMs, especially for like every use case. So what's nice about writing your own blockchain and like software that lives and can be upgraded over time is that if there's a use case that AMMs are good for, we can still add that in. So you could imagine having like AMMs used for the long tail of spot markets, for example, but then also using order books for like perpetual swaps. Maybe there's, I've seen a lot of like really cool research for using AMMs for like options and stuff like that. So like, I think what's nice is when you develop your own software, you don't have to rule out any of those things. You can continue to kind of like see what other innovations other people are working on and sort of see if that makes sense for your use case and like add it in if that's going to be what makes for a better product experience. So I think that's also one thing that's like pretty exciting about developing like open source software that's also has a lot of agency, is that you don't necessarily have to be fighting like the system that you're working on. You can just be like, okay, we think this is like the best route forward, and we can also have the option to add additional stuff later if that turns out to be make for a better product experience for users.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you kind of mentioned about the kind of alluding to the open source aspect of it. So if I was reading correctly, like essentially all layers of the stack will be open source. Wanted to talk if you could just like highlight the different pieces of what it takes to get this off the ground. So anywhere from like the nodes to I think the indexers to the client. Like what does it mean at each stack? And then maybe just a question that I've been having is like who do you anticipate to run these nodes? Do you anticipate individuals, groups, whether it's like companies? So kind of two questions there.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess the first one is like, what are all the different components? So it's basically like you have to write the node software, and the node software is going to be virtually the same between like normal full nodes that are kind of more passive, I guess, and then like validators who are signing blocks and proposing blocks. So the software there is like pretty similar. You just write one, and it like you basically just turn off some of the features of the validator if you're running a full node. So there's that. There's kind of like client libraries and software. So I guess these libraries would probably be both used by, say, programmatic traders, but also people developing front-end systems. So that's another thing. Like you have to also develop front-end systems so that users can interact with the protocol in a way that makes sense to them. So both like web front-end, mobile apps, those are going to be the big pieces. And then I guess those have to integrate with wallet software, of which we're not like super focused on building our own wallet software. Like right now, we're focused on allowing people to use the wallets that they're already coming with. But like, how can we enable that in a way when you have people coming from like so many different wallets, which are not necessarily compatible and stuff like that? So that's kind of its own can of worms. But wanted to mention like wallets is an important piece of software that we're not necessarily like building out right now, but that we have to. That's an important part of like the usability stack. We're also building like an indexing service, which will index the events of the blockchain in a better way and allow people to kind of call these indexers more like they would Web 2 services. So just be like, okay, give me the historical trade data basically, and the indexing service would like give that to you in a way that's like a little bit better than the nodes kind of spitting out like raw logs and stuff like that. And I think that's, yeah, then there's kind of like, I guess other part of the question is like, who's going to be running all this software? Yeah, so I guess first of all, for the validators and the indexers, like you probably want people to be running those who have some stake in this system. So they want like dYdX to succeed. And then they also will be getting like paid, let's say like transaction fees and stuff like that. So similar to like other blockchains. We haven't really decided on kind of how we're going to propose like if there's going to be like emissions versus like transaction fees and stuff like that. But I think ideally like you would basically just have think of this as an exchange but decentralized. So like a true decentralized exchange. And like it's like, okay, well, why does Binance run their servers? It's like, okay, they allow people to trade and they get trading fees off of that. I guess we'll have to look into a little bit of like the economics there, like what makes sense, and like what makes sense for like, okay, that does have to be like dYdX token emissions and stuff like that. But none of that is finalized, so can't share too much there.
Yeah, well, maybe depending on how much you can share, but I was wondering about, so is the goal that, well, one potential goal is the trading fee that the user pays goes to those who are hosting these nodes, or the validators, or both. And then perhaps dYdX as a company hosts one of these nodes. Is that?
Well, yeah, I guess there's like full nodes and validator nodes. We wouldn't be running our own validator node. But like So if you wanted to know what types of people would probably run like the validator nodes or the nodes that are actually creating the blocks,
Mhm.
that would probably be like anyone that you see running a validator, let's say on other Cosmos chains, Cosmos Hub. You
I
have
see.
like Solana validators, you have ETH validators. So probably like actually like a decent number of companies that all they do is run like staking software or like node software. Probably a lot of the centralized exchanges will like have their own validator since they also offer staking services and stuff like that. So I think it'll look probably pretty similar to a lot of the other blockchains out there.
Okay.
But we probably will run our own full node,
Mhm.
just so that we can like collect data and make sure that that everything's like running smoothly. There's no like memory spikes. Have some data, yeah, about like the blockchain itself and be able to display that if people want to go to like dYdX.exchange and like see some info and like some stats about the blockchain as a whole, then that'll be important for us to like, I guess, run our own full nodes at least, but not planning on running a validator.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Like be part of the ecosystem, be able to just be in the know of what's happening from that angle. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that was like very illuminating to see kind of from the ground up like how things are being built and different aspects of that. Maybe take a little bit pivot over into the collaboration with 0x. I know you mentioned earlier when you were first looking into or just first entering the space, like 0x Maker, these projects earlier in the day were kind of were instrumental in helping guide some of the direction. So yeah, curious where things are now with the how did the two projects work together?
Yeah, so I think this is probably like our sort of like our third iteration of using 0x. The first one I mentioned was like kind of providing liquidity to our margin trading tokens and being able to like enter basically like mint new margin trading tokens or burn them to like redeem them for your profit. So those trades had to use like on-chain liquidity. Then when we started doing like our combined margin trading and lending pool protocol, then we also initially used like a bunch of on-chain liquidity, basically all 0x to do those trades. But since we were using like this open liquidity, like that, it was also I remember back in the day there was like Radar Relay and like all these other like exchanges using 0x. So it would basically be like if we wanted to take an available order, we would like give the user the order, like I guess through the front end, we would like help surface that to the user, and then they would basically have to like send their own transaction through MetaMask or through Ledger or whatever, where they'd have to like hit send, and then they have to wait for a bit for it to get mined, and then they would have to also hope that no one else took that order on like Radar Relay or like anywhere else. So that resulted in like a lot of kind of like reverts, and then their trade wouldn't go through, and then they would have to like have some gas burned, and so that basically that wasn't like a great user experience for them. So that was kind of like our second time using 0x, and then we started using our own liquidity basically to like I guess prevent this like clashing from happening and prevent these reverts and have users not have to spend gas on their transactions, and we thought that made for a better user experience. And then our product today, we only margin in USDC, but people might come with like a variety of different tokens, whether that's like Tether or maybe they have ETH and they like want to trade perps on dYdX. Rather than just being like, okay, go somewhere else, trade that, and come back, we basically plug into 0x's liquidity system on our own front end. So we say, okay, you have ETH, we'll just like in one click, we'll trade this for you, or like we won't trade it for you, but we'll help construct the transaction where you can take your ETH, convert it to USDC, and deposit it all in one transaction so that you don't have to go out, go to a different website, send one transaction, come back, approve again, and then deposit it. So I don't know too much about the internal system, but I think it's basically being routed through 0x smart contracts, and that might either use kind of an RFQ system, combination of RFQ system from 0x, but also like when it hits the chain, it kind of checks some other prices, like maybe Uniswap or Curve or something will give me a better price for my like USDT to USDC swap, and then choose the best path and like give the user the best liquidity for when the transaction actually hits the chain. So it's basically like we use it as an onboarding tool that'll help people like come to the exchange with whatever tokens they have, even if it's not USDC.
That makes sense. So essentially, like dYdX, you can only is the proper way of saying it, like you can only have USDC as collateral, and then someone coming in who wants to engage with dYdX might have something else. So then you use 0x to do the swapping so that they can easily swap from their current asset into USDC so that they can use dYdX in a seamless process without having to go off somewhere and then figure that out and then come back in. So it's just like one stop done. Okay. Nice.
Exactly. And I think like on your guys' end, I think you sort of solved this problem of the transactions failing or like being front run and stuff like that by using an RFQ system, which will like give each user their own quote. So that can't be taken by like or front run by other people. And then also like if that if the user like just kind of sits on the order for a while and that quote is now expired, then it will just end up routing liquidity through like another something like Uniswap, which will like help with making sure that the transaction is not going to revert. That's not going to be a bad user experience. So
yeah, exactly. Just I guess two different thoughts there of like the composability of each project. So like you guys are focused on the exchange aspect of it, and then we can help with finding the best trades, protecting users from MEV attacks or other things that might happen to them when they're out there swapping. And so like when you plug these things together, it makes it for a seamless process. So that's cool. Yeah. Well, then to your point about, so right now you guys require USDC. Sorry, you require USDC. So then the move over into Cosmos, like how will that be handled? Because I presume it's not, they're not, do they take ERC20 compatible tokens? They do.
So there's a couple of different ways that you can do things. We've been working closely with like Circle and stuff to make sure that there's USDC on Cosmos. Right now, like the only USDC on mainnet, I guess, is like Axelar bridged USDC. And so I think Axelar has their own Cosmos chain, and they basically can like help bridge ERC20 USDC into the Cosmos ecosystem and then pass that around through IBC. But I think Circle on their end, they're basically like, okay, once we know people want USDC adoption on like a certain ecosystem, we want to basically provide it natively rather than like having sort of the canonical USDC be some wrapped USDC that they don't really have. That if there is like a hack on it or something and all the funds were lost, that they don't want kind of like the name USDC attached to that. So I think that sort of happened on Avalanche for a while, where there was this kind of like bridged USDC, and that became the canonical USDC. And then they were like, oh, okay, we're releasing our actual native USDC on Avalanche. So they're actually releasing USDC in the Cosmos ecosystem through like, it will be like a new blockchain that's like for issuing assets. So like Tether or like anyone else who wanted to like issue assets through there can do it. And that's going to be not part of the Cosmos Hub, but it's basically like uses interchain security with the Cosmos Hub. So it uses like the same validator set as the Cosmos Hub to run this like other blockchain. And then we can basically plug in to that blockchain through IBC and then transfer USDC from there to our own chain. So that's what we're planning on doing, like support just USDC again. I think eventually we want to, well, I guess two things. Eventually we want to support like a lot more assets. So I think IBC will help us do that. It can be tricky though to like support other stablecoins, as you've seen like Tether and stuff like that are not always like sort of like pegged to the dollar. You might also have like some concerns about kind of the centralization of a lot of these services like USDC, where you can kind of like just like blacklist addresses. So I think over time we'll try and like adapt and see kind of what people most want to trade, continue to audit that, like make sure that people can like onboard in the currencies that they want and provide collateral in the currencies that they want without necessarily like introducing too much additional risk to the system. And yeah, I guess like number one is kind of like protecting users. So we don't want to do anything that would be like, okay, this introduces like an attack vector or something like that. So the simplest thing we've kind of found for now is to just support a single token, and we think USDC is the best for that. So we're excited that Circle's being very serious about supporting the Cosmos ecosystem in that way.
Yeah, that's helpful. Yeah, background on that implementation, because it totally makes sense. Like having a canonical version of it versus there's just like 500 500 wrap versions of it. It's like, which one do I actually use? Cool. So maybe I know we're kind of getting towards the end of the conversation. So just want to wrap up with, what's next for dYdX. I saw you guys published your milestone 2 completion today, at least updating the community that this has happened. So maybe a quick summary of what happened there, and then what's next.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess for our own internal purposes, we basically broke out into milestones what we want to do in building our new Cosmos chain. So we broke it up into 5 milestones, which are basically like, okay, let's finish the most important features in the earlier milestones, and then at end of each milestone, we basically also have associated like network upgrade or network change. So in the first few milestones, that's focused on like the core product of the actual exchange, trading, funding rates, Oracle prices, like anything that you think about when you are running an exchange. And then the later milestones are kind of like things that are not necessarily part of the core product, but it's still important for a blockchain, whether that's like governance, IBC, connecting other chains, making sure we can onboard like the USDC and stuff like that. That's kind of like reserved for later milestones. And then for our first milestone, the network upgrade was basically like after the first milestone, we want a developer testnet internal to dYdX where we can just like play around with stuff. Front-end developers can like develop against it. We can develop libraries against it and like call these nodes and make sure that everything's like running correctly. And then we just finished milestone 2, and as part of that, we basically wanted to have a more robust internal testnet. So we built a bunch of tooling around like, okay, we can reset the testnet back to Genesis. We have like a faucet so we can have people onboard internally more easily. And then we have a bunch of like bots adding liquidity, trading liquidity. So you can just like go on and feel like it's an actual exchange and that there's like someone placing liquidity on the exchange. It's not just like a barren order book and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess most of like the core business logic is done. I think there's like a lot of optimizations and stuff that we still want to do and make sure that everything's like working as intended. The next milestone will be basically like finishing off those core trading things. So we have like, market orders and limit orders, but we also want to add like fill or kill, post only, stop loss orders, that kind of thing. And then at the end of this third milestone, we'll introduce like an external to dYdX testnet. So we'll work with some people to like spin up validator nodes and make sure that like, okay, our documentation is good enough that someone can spin up a validator. And like, what kinds of problems do we see when like it's not just us running nodes in our internal testnet, but we actually have kind of like a more public testnet. So at the end of milestone 4 will be like that external testnet, but made more public. So it's not like so anyone can run a validator node. Probably find additional problems with people kind of like maybe there'll be like kind of like network halts and stuff like that. So like kind of getting those out of the way in the public testnet, which won't use like real USDC and stuff like that, but people will be able to finally use the chain, see like use it through the front end, kind of like see what the user experience is like. And then end of milestone 5 will be like releasing mainnet. So once all those kind of like problems are worked out, we'll connect to the chain issuing USDC, and then like release the genesis of mainnet. So that's kind of like, I guess, how it's broken down from higher perspective. So we're kind of like in the middle of working on milestone 3 out of 5 right now.
Sounds good. Wait, a random question I had was, do you anticipate projects other than dYdX to be building on the dYdX chain in the future? Because you mentioned, I think earlier on, like building tooling. Is that the plan down the line?
I think we're open to it. I think there's not like, so I guess it depends. There's like, well, it's going to be open source, so anyone can build on it, I guess. Um, we're not we're not opening up the chain as kind of like a general compute platform. It's that we're not trying to be Ethereum or Evmos or something like that with more generalized smart contracts. We want to like keep the chain focused, because I think when you if you open up to be more of like a general computing platform, then you can kind of like lose focus. Your block space has to start doing like a lot more things now, so you're kind of like competing with block space between like the core product of the exchange and then running more generalized smart contracts. So I think there's no like current plans to like open it up in that way, but there'll definitely be like I think the dYdX Foundation is planning on giving like grants to people. There's like a whole grants program, so for people that want to like, I guess, build open source to like improve the exchange. And then I think that's like an option. And then I guess other options are basically just building what if you think about like what can an exchange do, you have like Coinbase and Binance doing all these things. You might have like lending, you might have NFT trading, like all those things can be built as part of the core exchange. But that would be kind of like more custom to the dYdX chain, I think, rather than sort of adopting like generalized smart contracts, as I was talking about. Yeah.
I see. I think very early on you mentioned like the wallet experience. Do you imagine opening that up and maybe someone coming in and improving that experience for interacting with your blockchain specifically? So I guess modifications or improvements in certain ways.
Yeah, I guess we want it just to be as open as possible. Like if you just kind of like use standard cryptographic like curves and like signatures and stuff like that, then you can allow like other wallets to come on and onboard easily. It is kind of like a tricky balance because we do want to provide like the best experience for people, but it's just hard to do with like kind of every wallet being disparate. But we also don't want to do the thing where we're like, okay, let's just introduce our own wallet, and then that's just like just one more wallet that people would have to download or just like worry about, or that we would have to support, because we would want to continue to support all the old wallets. So it's like that XKCD where they're like, oh, there's 100 different standards, we should just create one standard, and then there's like 101 different standards. So we don't want to like go that route, but it's definitely something that's like, wallet software and self-custody is definitely something that's like really important to anyone using DeFi. So that's definitely kind of like a tricky thing, and that we continue to evaluate, but we don't have any like real like slam dunk solutions to that at the moment. Hopefully just wallet software and wallet software in general gets a little better over time and continues to be like more standardized over time. I think one of the things we've seen over the past, like since I've worked in crypto, is just like, a lot of the wallet software is just like not very compatible, and the standards kind of like move slowly. And then MetaMask is like one of the most used wallets, but doesn't necessarily follow like the EIPs faithfully, and they sort of have their own standards. And then other wallets, because MetaMask is so popular, are trying to match MetaMask standards rather than like the socially accepted standards. So that's kind of been an ongoing thing. But sorry to go down that rabbit hole. But
no, I think this is all interesting conversation, in the sense that like everything, even though we've been around, like people have been around the space 7+ how many years now, it's all still quite nascent in certain things of deciding which chains and how to build certain things are still a constant work in progress. And so I think it's more just like airing out what has worked and what can be improved. So all interesting conversation. Well, how about for the last question then is, what are resources that you would recommend for both developers and retail users to learn more and maybe build with dYdX?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's going to be a lot easier to kind of understand what's going on when we open source our code. And we're planning that basically to be, I think at this point, at the end of milestone 3, which we're working on right now. So that'll be a lot kind of easier to see what's going on for like our existing system with Starkware. we have like documentation on our site about how all that works. A lot of that is still interacting through kind of like more Web 2 portals. So like sending API requests to our servers and stuff like that. So that'll be like different than how things will work in our Cosmos chain. I don't know. I don't really have anything in particular to plug that I think wouldn't be able to be findable like on our website, dYdX.exchange. So there's all the socials there, documentation. We have a Discord for asking questions. We also have like a help desk on the actual exchange site. So I want to give those a shout out for anyone kind of looking to ask questions or find out more.
Cool, that makes sense. So essentially, yeah, keep an eye out on the next milestones that you guys are hitting. Yeah, for those who are interested in learning more and diving into Cosmos, maybe a preparation, that could be cool. And then yeah, check out their exchange and their website. So dYdX, I think .exchange, should be in the YouTube links if you're watching there. And yeah, definitely follow them on Twitter. Follow Brendan as well. His socials linked in the YouTube description as well. Yeah, so any last minute words before we close out for the day?
I didn't have anything in particular. Just thanks for having me on and appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was a enlightening discussion, and yeah, really enjoyed diving into just how you guys are building this out, and yeah, looking forward to the future and where this takes you and takes the whole space in general. So thanks again, Brendan, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks.
All right.